belongs to God and the mission that we
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
It's so wonderful to see you here today as we take a moment to reflect on an event that shaped the course of our nation, the Battle of Lexington Green. On April 19th, 1775, in the early morning hours, a group of brave colonial militias stood their ground on Lexington Green, facing off against the British. No one knew exactly what would happen next, but when the first shots rang out, the fight for American independence had begun. As we approach the 250th anniversary of that historic day next month, it's the perfect time for us to remember those who stood for freedom and to consider what their bravery means today. That's why I'm so excited to introduce David Seuss, our speaker. David has been an active member of the American Battlefield Trust for over 25 years and has lifetime color bearer status. Color bearers are honored for their extraordinary commitment they bring to the mission of saving the physical sites that are most important to our nation's history. David's love of history and preservation began when growing up in a small town in the South, near the site of a Civil War skirmish that had resulted in a river transport steamship being burned by the Union cavalry. When he was a teenager, when the river was low, he could still see the steamer's paddle wheel until a severe flood washed it away one day. That incident had a big impact on him. He thought, how could we have let this irreplaceable piece of our history be lost? Many years later, the American Battlefield Trust gave him the opportunity to contribute to preserving the extraordinary stories of history, which only the places where it happened can tell. David believes history is driven by the decisions of people, and he is fascinated by how sometimes just one person, just one decision, changes everything that will happen from that moment on. So without further ado, please let me introduce David Seuss, our speaker today.
Thank you. Sheri has an ancestor who answered the call on April 19th, grabbed his musket, and marched for Boston, a member of a militia company. So there is no better person to have organized this event than Sheri. With that, let's get started. My first observation is history is not just the story of kings and empires. History often appears to be driven by grand events and a complex chain of events, alliances, politicians, treaties, large armies and invasions, technology, changing warfare. But beneath these changes, the smaller decisions that individual participants may determine what actually goes down. I first became interested in this as an idea when I read the book Young Men and Fire by Norman MacLean about the 1949 Man Gulch fire that killed 13 smoke jumpers. My career has been as a leader of high-tech businesses. And as a leader, I'm constantly thinking about, will my decision work out for the organization? And in this case, a very experienced leader led his men into a situation where many of them were killed. And I was trying to figure out where he made the mistake. They marched down the gulch. They had a plan to fight the fire at the bottom of the gulch. It was on one side of it. There was a river there. They were going to have the river behind them. If the fire got out of control, they could retreat into the river. And the plan didn't work. And as they marched down the gulch, what they did was they stopped for lunch. They were going to be fighting the fire for hours, maybe all day, all night, and they stopped for lunch. 30 minutes eating lunch. And during those 30 minutes, the fire jumped over the gulch, blocked their path, crowned, and came roaring toward them. And if they had not stopped for lunch, they would have been all right. That was the decision that did it. So I started looking at other disasters and historical events. The Titanic, if Murdoch, who was the officer in charge of the deck, had not turned the ship, they would have been fine when they spotted the iceberg. 3 Mile Island, if the supervisor had not switched off the safety system, if it just left his hands off of the panel, 3 Mile Island would not have occurred. Over and over and over, I kept seeing these moments where an individual made a single decision at the end of some chain of events, and that was the decision that determined the outcome. So when it comes to April 19th, 1775, what we're looking for is the last decision in the chain. the last inflection point where the decision made by a single individual collapses the many possibilities into one defined future that then actually comes to be. Now we have many people to consider, and we're going to take each one of them and talk about them a little bit. There's Lord Dartmouth, there's General Gage, there's Margaret Kimball Gage, Paul Revere and William Dawes, Colonel Smith, Captain Parker, Major Pitcairn, Lieutenant Sutherland, and Lieutenant Adair. And all of these people played a part in what happened on April 19th. But I think we'll see that one of them was the last one in the family. If there's ever an award given for the most clueless instruction by a politician to a general, I think it would be the letter from Lord Dartmouth to General Gage that was received either is debated on the 14th or 16th of April, 1775. In the letter, Lord Dartmouth instructs Gage to arrest the Patriot leaders who are fomenting rebellion. An excerpt from it would be, "The violences committed by those who have taken up arms in Massachusetts have appeared to me as an act of a rude battle, without concert, without conduct, and therefore I think that a small force now, if put to the task, would be able to conquer them with a greater probability of success than might be expected from a larger army. And if the steps taken upon the occasion be accompanied with due precaution, and every means to be devised to keep the measure secret till the moment of execution, it can hardly fail of success, and will perhaps be accomplished without bloodshed. But, however that may be, in other words, if there is bloodshed, I must again repeat that any efforts on their part to encounter a regular force cannot be very formidable." Lord Dartmouth is so out of touch with what is going on. He is comfortable thousands of miles away. He has no clue how widespread the rebellion is. He has no clue how many men the militia can put into the field. He has no clue as to their level of familiarity with firearms and tactics. He has no clue about how well trained they are with their militia activities. This is, if there is a Hall of Fame in the top 10 for clueless instructions, this letter is number one. Now, Gage did not launch the expedition to Concord because of this letter. He had already started planning it. On the 5th of April, he had notified one of his admirals, or an admiral, wouldn't be his admiral, an admiral to prepare boats for the expedition. So Lord Dartmouth this letter didn't trigger the events, but it certainly created, it certainly represents the attitude of the British government at this time period and the expectations that Gage was trying to live up to. So Gage then orders the expedition to march. He writes orders. He appoints Francis Smith to be Colonel Smith to lead the expedition. This is an excerpt from those orders. Having received, and this is an image of Gage, by the way. Having received intelligence that a quantity of ammunition, provisions, artillery tents, and small arms have been collected at Concord for the avowed purpose of raising and supporting a rebellion against His Majesty, you will march with a corps of Brigadiers and light infantry put under your command with utmost expedition and secrecy to Concord, where you will seize and destroy, that's his spelling, destroy all artillery, ammunition, provisions, tents, small arms, and all military stores whatsoever. But you will take care that the soldiers do not plunder the inhabitants or hurt private property. And there was then an enclosed hand-drawn map that showed the two bridges, one being the North Bridge that they needed to secure, with an advance party of the best marchers. Now Gage also, when he gave them the written orders, he told Smith, do not open them and do not read them until you are marching. In order to preserve operational security, the commander of the expedition, Smith, did not know what the order said until he had already started the expedition. Now, this wasn't the first time that the British had launched out of Boston to seize powder and cannon and keep them out of colonial hands. There was the powder alarm in September of '74, where the British had actually gone to get their own powder that was being stored in a magazine there, and they wanted to recover it before the Patriots stole it, because they were quite active stealing cannon and powder and muskets and all kinds of supplies. So they went to get their own powder, and they managed to make the raid. They got all the way. The magazine was in present-day Somerville. In those days, they thought it was part of Charlestown. And they made the trip in complete secrecy, got there, got it in and out without being detected. The sale went a little differently. That was in February of 75, only 2 months before the march to Concord. So-called Salem Gunpowder Retreat, or Leslie's Retreat. It is celebrated at Salem, and there are reenactments. This is an image from a reenactment, I think, last year. In that case, they sailed out of Boston, they sailed north, they landed, and they weren't detected until they were on the ground marching toward Salem. You all probably know the story. The Salem militia pulled up the planks from the bridge. They were on one side, the British were on the other. There was no way for the British to cross. And meanwhile, the cannon and other stuff that they had gone to get was well moved away. Only one injury. There was a scuffle over some boats that the British wanted to use to cross the river. The colonials were trying to destroy the boats real quick before the British could grab them. One colonial militiaman bared his breast to the bayonets of the British, and the British soldiers slightly injured him with the bayonet. Apparently, that militiaman loved at parties to bare his chest for the rest of his life and show everyone present the scar he got from the British bayonet. No one got hurt. There was no gunfire. And both times, the British had really good operational secrecy. They got out of Boston with no warning going out that they were going to march. But not this time. This time, there was a spy in General Gage's inner circle. On the evening of April 18th, the spy tipped Joseph Warren, who was the leader of the Sons of Liberty spy network inside Boston, of the plan to march to Concord to seize the cannon and the war supplies. It was Warren's agent, and no one else knew who it was. And Warren himself was killed in the Battle of Bunker Hill 2 months later, and he dies with the secret of who the agent is. Many people, many historians and authors believe it was Margaret Kimball Gage, the wife of General Gage. She was a fierce patriot. She loved America, and they had a torrid love affair. Gage is often observed, he wasn't very active, he didn't plan many expeditions, there were months between things. He didn't like to work at night, he didn't like to work on the weekends, he wanted to be with his wife, who he adored. And she adored him. And frankly, if you're a guy who looks sort of like this, a little portly, which British officers, tended to be as they got up in the ranks, pretty plain looking, and you have this woman as your wife, who is obviously beautiful and intelligent. This is a very interesting painting. It's from 1771, and look at the expression on her face. Usually when you're setting for your portrait, what you do is you smile. And you're going to go down through history with this painting. And you usually want to look a little happy. And she doesn't. She's very pensive. She's obviously troubled by something. And what she's troubled by is she is married to the man who's supposed to suppress the rebellion of the country which she loves. The Kimbells have an interesting relationship with Gage. Gage's military secretary is actually her brother. So you've got this loyalist officer in the family. This is a family divided against itself. You've got the fierce patriot, who is Margaret Kimball, and then you have Gage, and you have them in the middle of this historical storm. Later, Gage said he only told 2 people about the plan: his military secretary, Major Kimball, and Margaret. So who was it who did it? And how can this not be a blockbuster Hollywood movie? Seriously, with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie playing the lead roles. Look at what you've got here. You've got passionate love, you have betrayal, you have revolution, you have war and violence and loyalty and family dynamics at a level that The Sopranos had. This is an amazing story, and this is one of the key players in this whole drama. And she's the one, probably, who tipped off Warren, who in turn met with Paul Revere, and they decided to raise the alarm. Anyone who hasn't read Paul Revere's Rod by Fisher, you should leave here, order it on Amazon, and get it tomorrow and start reading. Revere has organized a communication system that is brilliant. In each town there are writers who will then fan out from that town and raise the alarm. So Dawes and Revere start the alarm, but then writers go out from each node in the network in different directions, and the British can't cut one road between two towns and keep the alarm from going, because if it can't go this way, it'll go to this node and then back to this way. And in the book, Fisher in Paul Revere's Ride, he actually tracks the time the various alarms arrive in different cities, and it's an amazing story. Revere was a brilliant man, not because of his ride, but because of his planning for how to build a robust network that would, he invented network warfare. So Dawes and Revere ride. Revere rose past the HMS Somerset, which is in Boston Harbor at the time. There are British Marine snipers who are deadly, accurate, never miss, in the riggings, orders to shoot anybody trying to leave Boston. But that night, there was an unusual astronomical event. The moon rose at 10 p.m. on the horizon, and it was full. And it cast a moon shadow at the Somerset. And Revere and his rowers are quietly rowing through the moon shadow of the Somerset. One sound. Bam! They're dead. Silently. They land in Charlestown. You can go to the spot where they landed. If you go to the parking lot opposite the USS Constitution, walk over toward the Constitution, there's a historic marker there. It's the spot where Paul Revere landed to start his famous ride. If you're there at sunset, you will have the added bonus of the Constitution will fire a cannon at you. If you stand in front of the cannon, because you'll know which one it is, there's one cannon poking out. If you stand in front of it, the concussion wave will be and the sound will be the loudest noise you've ever heard in your entire life. And it's also a 1/10 charge, by the way. Really worth doing. You can see the Paul Revere landing site. You can be blasted by the cannon. I was there when on July 4th they did a 21-gun salute for something, and I got blasted 21 times in a row. It was fabulous. They also do a very nice ceremony where they strike the cloud, the colors at sunset. All right. So Dawes has his own wonderful story. He had set up. He planned ahead. He would often go out at night across Boston Neck. The guards there got to know him. The sergeant there, he'd always give the sergeant a little rum, he had an old plow horse and a wagon, and he would, or carriage, and he would come along. I think it was a wagon, actually. And he got them habituated to him passing through. Well, that night, he comes up, the private stops him. They have orders to stop anybody, arrest anyone trying to leave Boston. And the sergeant comes out of the little guard hut, I suppose it was there, and says, "Oh, that's Dawes. That's okay. Let him go." Dawes goes around the corner. That night, instead of a plow horse hooked in the wagon, there was a fine riding steed. He throws the saddle on and takes off on his ride. Revere's going one way, Dawes the other. I'll show you the routes here in just a second. Revere reaches Lexington first at 12 o'clock. He alerts the militia. Captain Parker calls the militia to assemble. I haven't been able to find, if anybody here is from the Lexington Minuteman Company, raise your hand. I haven't been able to find exactly how he raised the alarm. The traditional way would be a gunshot in the church bell. And the Green had a church bell, and they all had guns. And so that was probably what he did. He probably fired a shot and then rang the bell. But not 100% sure. But anyway, the militia is called to assemble. Now, we can look at the routes for a second. Of course, Boston was a peninsula, very narrow neck. Back Bay had not been filled in at that point. It wasn't until 1835 that Back Bay gets filled in. Revere rose across to Charlestown. The landers were home. Of course, they had nothing to do with signaling Revere. He already knew the route that the British were taking. It was, again, his network plan. He had riders waiting in Charlestown, waiting for the signal. If Revere didn't make it, they would do the ride. So he had a constant redundant planning going on. So he takes off from Charlestown. He has to divert to Medford to avoid a cavalry patrol that is trying to stop riders from leaving Boston. And he goes through present-day Arlington. I can't pronounce it. Monotony? Somebody help me? Monotony, thank you. Monotony. Now Arlington. And he gets to Lexington. Now the British troops are going to row across from Back Bay and land at Leechburg Point. If you would like to go to the place where they landed, it's go out the glass doors of the food court of the Cambridge Side Galleria Mall, and you will be pretty much at the spot where the British Army landed, which is Leechburg Point, was called, and or Phipps Farm, it was called also. So the idea here is to cut off, not having to go that big loop, you see, and that was Dawes's route, the big loop. I think that was a really big mistake that Smith made, that Gage made. It took them 4 hours to load the boats, go across that little piece of water, and unload. And they started at 10 p.m. They didn't get done to 2 a.m. To start their march. If they had gone around, my guess is it would have taken about an hour and a half, maybe. Let's call it an hour and a half to make that. Instead, they lost 4 hours, and that's really important because during that time period, remember, Dawes and Revere are alerting the countryside. The next sets of riders are going out. The alarm is spreading basically across New England, not only across eastern Massachusetts, to Rhode Island, to Connecticut, to New Hampshire, to Maine. The alarm is spreading like wildfire while they're rowing across the Charles River, one boat at a time, to get started. How am I doing on time? I have my watch on. Okay, good. So, the British column, of course, is led by Smith. This is Smith. Smith has been described as portly. He was not very physically active. And he was an odd choice to lead this expedition, which needed to move fast, keep it moving, deep in enemy territory, get back out. The reason he was chosen was he was the senior colonel. It was strictly on seniority. And Gage didn't want to touch off any kind of jealousy on the part. If he had picked someone other than Gage, other than Smith to lead it, he would have had to have passed over him, and he would have to pick the favorite, which he didn't want to do. So he assigns it to Smith, who is sort of, I would call him boringly competent, nothing flashy about him, nothing remarkable, not very active physically, he doesn't move up and down the line very much. People commented on that. But he assigns as his second in command Major Pitcairn from the Marines, who is sort of the opposite of Smith in every way. So the British wake their troops up about 9 p.m. They begin loading the boats at 10. There's 21 companies on the expedition, 11 are grenadiers, and their mission of the grenadiers was shock troops. They were large physically. They had these great hats, and make them look even taller. And their job was really to lead a bloody frontal assault if one needed to. Then there were 10 companies of light infantry. They served as advanced scouts, flankers, and skirmishers. They were completely different from the grenadiers. We're going to talk about light infantry in a moment. 700 men total. Now they land at Leechburg Point and they start their march at 2 a.m. As of this moment, Smith has not read his orders yet. He has not opened them. He's been specifically instructed not to read the orders for operational security reasons. So they're now marching toward campus. We don't really, I haven't been able to find any description of when he opens the orders. We know it is by 3 a.m., so it is between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. He has an important meeting at 3 a.m. on the march where he does know what is happening. So let's talk about the column. So 11 companies of grenadiers, 10 of light infantry. Now the light infantry were very physically fit. They were agile and active. They were selected for their fitness, energy, and enterprise. A skirmisher is out in front of the main body, and each individual skirmisher makes up his own mind when he will fire and who he will shoot at, and whether or not he should retreat or whether or not he should advance. The model of the British Army that we sometimes have in our heads is that they just stand in their line and they follow orders blindly. That is not the light infantry. The light infantry would be closer to an American concept of a ranger almost. They're very physically fit, and they are expected to show individual initiative at every moment. This, I think, plays into what happens on Lexington Green. Now, this is Don Troiani's image of a member of the Light Infantry Company of the 4th Regiment, which Troiani says would have been possibly on Lexington Green. This is what the uniform was of a British light infantryman on Lexington Green on the morning of April 19th. Let me point out several things. He has no coat. It is a cold night. It is chilly. It's down. Anybody here tried to go to a baseball game in April at Fenway Park? It is a tough thing to do. It was a chilly, cold night, but they move light. Look at how little equipment he has. He doesn't have a backpack. He doesn't have. They carried 30 rounds of ammunition on the trip. He has a 10-pound ground vest musket. He's got a couple more pounds of ball and powder, and that's it. That's what they traveled with. He's carrying less than 15 pounds. He doesn't have that big hat, that we all love. He has a very functional hat. His entire kit and uniform is for mobility and speed, and that's what the light infantry do. And he's expected to use his personal initiative. Let's take a look at Parker. Now here's a famous statue near us here. And in fairness to Kitson, he did not intend this to be an image of Parker, but it has come to be that over time. For example, I noticed on Fox News, the website, where I go to Fox for all of my precisely accurate and correct history, and it says this is an image of John Parker. No, it's not. Everything about this image is wrong. This is the Lexington Minuteman, of course. Several things are wrong with this. But before we do that, Parker probably looks closer to something like this. This is Don Troiani's image of him. And let's see what we know about him. He's not at all like the picture on the left. He was 48 years old. He was stoutly built. Not the slim guy you see in the statue. He was medium height, which in these days would have made him 5'5". Maybe. He wasn't that tall. He was a woodworker. He worked with his hands, making spinning wheels, press screws, and compass boxes. He had been a veteran of the French and Indian War, and he may have trained with Rogers Rangers. That is a report or some accounts, not well documented. But his actions at Parker's Revenge really suggest that he knew what he was doing when it came to small unit tactics in wooded territory. He brilliantly manages the fighting at Parker's Revenge, which is in the afternoon after the British are retreating from Concord along the Battle Road. And he was very ill with tuberculosis at the time of the event. Now there's some other problems here with the statue. It was a cold night. The statue isn't wearing a coat. I've never seen a haircut like that on any image ever of a person from this time period. There were no Minutemen on Lexington Green. the Lexington Militia Company was not a Minuteman company. So the whole concept of this statute is wrong. So let's take a look at the Lexington Militia Company. They were militia, not Minutemen. They called themselves the Lexington Training Band. The current Lexington Minuteman group, reenactment group, calls themselves the Lexington Training Band as well. And to their credit, if you go to their website, they say there were no Minutemen on Lexington Green on April 19th. They say that. But still, for a marketing reason, I wouldn't be called a Minuteman too. So they were not young. They were not young like today's soldiers are. They were generally middle-aged, middle-class, established farmers, merchants, clergy, craftsmen, and local professionals. If you look closely, just to the left of Parker's shoulder there, the gentleman in the back has a collar on, being a minister. He's got a little hat that, was not the peaked hat. And they were middle class. The young people in the militia were the sons of members. They were there because their dad or their uncle was there. So they're middle-aged. And not all the company mustered. Haven't been able to find numbers on how many didn't muster. But some people probably didn't hear the alarm. Lived too far away, you wouldn't hear it. Some people, there were two musters, the first one and the second one. Some people didn't come back after the first one. There was a lot of drinking going on between those two. Some of the militiamen were probably still in the tavern on the second muster. But 77 men answered the second call. Now we get to the crux, the history-changing moment. The moment after which everything will be different. The world will be a different place. It happens as the advance, and one of the things I didn't quite point out was that the 3 o'clock meeting. Yes, at 3 o'clock, Smith holds a meeting with his officers. I've read different reports. Some say he was in Cambridge, some say he was in Arlington. Maybe it was between there, but at 3 o'clock, he holds a meeting with his officers. He probably reads them the orders. He certainly tells them what is in the orders. And he assigns 6 companies of light infantry to Major Pitcairn to be the flying advance guard, and they take off ahead of the main column. And they are moving quick. By the way, the British Army made the trip from Legionnaire Point to Lexington Green in 3 hours. I checked it on Google this morning, and Google says that walking it should be 4 hours. So they were moving quick. They were carrying they were carrying 15 pounds of equipment. But these men were fit. They were really up for the task. So they go on a quick march, starting at 3 a.m. So now it's 5 a.m. And the British have reached the Green. The advance guard has. The 6 light infantry companies under Major Pitcairn. Now Major Pitcairn is a Marine officer, and he's commanding infantry troops that he is not familiar with, and his troops are not familiar with him. The force that's General Gage put together borrowed regiments and companies, borrowed companies from many different regiments. He wanted the elite companies from each of the regiments, and so he put them together. And he also borrowed officers from them. So the entire column was being managed by officers who did not know the men and whose men did not know them. So, and the command structure was unclear. Pitcairn certainly was in charge of the 6 companies in front. There were 2 other very important officers along. One was William Sutherland, who was an infantry lieutenant, who was not assigned to the mission, but he saw the troops moving toward the boats, and he just jumped in one and wanted to be on it. And he really makes himself useful. He's very active in all of the events that happen during the day. And then there's a Marine lieutenant that probably Pitcairn would have known, who is second, maybe officially in command of the column, or maybe with Southern there, third in command, it would be unclear, but who is also, and that's Jesse Adair, Lieutenant Jesse Adair, who is, who we'll see in a moment, is near the front of the column, or at the front of the column. So he's at least a Marine officer that Pickering knows, but again, he's commanding light infantry companies who don't know him. He doesn't know them. They probably have some familiarity with tactics. The Marines operated more like the light infantry than they did like the Grenadiers, but still from a different discipline. As the first of the 6 light infantry companies, the advance guard, approached the green, they hit a moment of momentous significance. Do they turn left or do they turn right? And history turns on that decision. If they turn left, if you look, you can see the militia is lined up toward the back of the green. They're biased toward their left side of the green. There's 2 lines of basically 35 to 40 men each. Loose lines, space between the men, space between the ranks. They are not blocking the road to Concord. They are in a position to guard against an attempt to go up toward the Hancock Clock House, where Adams and Hancock are, which they might have known. And they are biased in that direction on that side of the green, but they are quite distant from the road to Concord, which goes to the left. The explicit orders of the British column at this moment are march to Concord as fast as you can. The explicit orders of the advance guard is get there rapidly. The advance guard is supposed to seize those bridges, without which the whole mission will fail. So as they approach the green, they see the militia. They had received reports that there was militia waiting for them. The reports had exaggerated their numbers and other things. But at approximately 120 yards from the line that the militia is on, they have to make a decision. Go left to Concord, avoid the conflict, go to the right toward the militia, and start a conflagration. That's the choice. This is the history-making decision. This is the last step in the chain. All of the people's decisions that have come before now come down to this moment and this decision. The decision is made. The first 3 companies swing right, and then 2 of them form up in front of the militia. The next 3 companies swing to the left and do not participate in the action. They actually stop on the road and wait. Now, we've all seen this image. As a matter of fact, if you looked at the invitation to this event, you saw this image. This is the one that was included. It's very famous. It's on book covers. It's on websites, innumerable websites. The Battle of Lexington by Ladn. Just about every detail in this painting is wrong. First of all, they're on the right side of the green, not on the left side of the green. You can tell that because of the orientation of the meeting house. The side face there, you could only see if you were on the right-hand side of the green. The British troops are too far away. They're maybe that looks like 75 yards to my old football trained eye. And the officer, there's only 1 officer on a horse. Many witnesses reported 3 officers on a horse. Would have had an officer who was the commander of the, I think this is the 10th on the 10th on the left, and the 4th is on the right. I think I've got that right. But there would have been an officer for each one of them. There were also mounted patrols that were returning to the main body. And many witnesses said there were 3 mounted officers, one of whom rides forward and gives an order to the militia to drop your arms and disband. You could not hear from that distance that order. 2 of the men aren't wearing winter coats. It was a chilly night. And while I do think the image captures the heroism of the moment, it does do that, and maybe art is supposed to deal with emotions. But I'm a history geek, and I just can't stand it when something's wrong with an image. This is really what it probably looked like. This is again Don Triani, who is, gets every detail correct. First of all, look how close the British are. The militia, the British light infantry, they were in motion. They were in a column at first, and then they formed a line, and they just kept moving. They never stopped. They just kept moving straight in. If you watch the TV series show, a movie made for TV, April morning. They stopped and they stand there for a while. No. They came streaming onto the green, they spread out into their companies, and they advanced. They're starting a bayonet charge here. You can see the troops. Let's see if I can get a cursor up here. Yeah, here we go. You can see they're starting the bayonet charge. You look at their legs. We've got 3 mounted officers here, close enough for the one who's closest to hear the command, to drop their arms and to disperse. There's already been an exchange of fire. One militiaman is on his knees, reloading. That might be Jonas Parker, who was reported. He fired his weapon, was hit by a British round, fell to his knees, and was reloading his weapon. Starts to reload his weapon to fire again. He's at the very beginning of the process. He's putting. It looks like he's going to cock it, where he can then put some powder in the pan. He has no chance of completing that before the British infantry are upon him. It's going to take 15 seconds from where he is to get his gun loaded. The British light infantry will be all over him, and he is in fact bayoneted to death while trying to reload his weapon. Maybe that's Parker in the gray coat. Whoever it is, he is heroically defiant, but also not sure what to do. He's not shooting. He's not retreating. You've got the gentleman on the left in the brown coat, who I think is being hit at that moment by a round. He's leaning back like that. A round is probably going into his chest. Also, there's this wonderful detail, very subtle, right here. And that is the 3 companies that did not go into the green that made the left turn. And we can actually see them, and the image would have been right. They're in the right place. They're all wearing winter coats. The light infantry is on them, very close. The Napoleonic era of warfare, this was just before Napoleon. It happened close, so this is an excellent image of what happened. So now let's look back at that fateful moment. Who made the decision to turn right instead of left? That is the person who started the American Revolution. Was it Major Pitcairn? Was it Lieutenant Sutherland? Was it Lieutenant Adair? Now let's look at Pitcairn. He was a Marine leader. Again, I mentioned that. Let's check. Good. He was a Marine leader, not an Army officer. He was 52 years old on April 19th. His father was a clergyman. His brother, a famed biologist. He was very well educated. He was from a family that really was well educated. He had 29 years of active duty that morning. He entered the Marines when he was 23. He was commissioned as a lieutenant 1 year later. This is a New York rise type thing. He served in Canada during the French and Indian War. Was a captain, was promoted to major in 1771. He came to Boston in 74. He was not naive about what was going on. He did advocate a short, sharp, 6 weeks before April 19th. He wrote a letter where he advocated a short, sharp campaign burning 2 or 3 towns to quell the growing rebellion. But he was very aggressive toward colonials. One author says that is why he ordered the troops onto Lexington Green. He was, subsequent to this, he was killed 2 months later in the Battle of Bunker Hill. His son was in the same unit. His son carried him off the battlefield after he had received a grievous head wound from which he died not later. Another candidate is William Sutherland. He was an Army lieutenant. He wasn't not supposed to be on the mission. At least he was an Army lieutenant. Jumped in the boat, made himself really useful. He had a habit of being at the hot spot. Later in the day, he's at the North Bridge. He actually tried to rally the troops that were holding North Bridge when they broke and ran, and the colonials opened fire on them. He was promoted to captain shortly after April 19th, and the major 4 years later. And he got probably his most famous encounter after Lexington and the North Bridge was he fought a battle with Washington's cavalry commander, Light Horse Harry Lee, at his last known action. Then there's Lieutenant Jesse Adair as a candidate for our decision maker. He was a Marine officer, so had a relationship with Pitcairn, not Army, but he was leading Army troops that day, probably known and trusted, as I said, by Pitcairn. He was 44 years old. He was not a kid. He was not young. He was 44 years old on April 19th. He was later referred to as the eldest lieutenant at the Battle of Bunker Hill, but he's mentioned favorably in the dispatches for leading a bloody assault on the Colonial Redoubt. He runs up on top of the redoubt and stands there trying to wave the men on at great personal risk. That assault was not the one that succeeded. The British take tremendous casualties in that assault. It was almost like he had something to prove. You know? We'll get back to that. He was promoted to captain, but then he was reduced out of the service in 1785 when they had a budget cut. That's layoffs even happened then, not age, but he died in 1796 at the age of 66. Apparently, it's like that, he wasn't that good at being a civilian, it turns out. So, which of the three of them made the order? Gage, in an official and public report, implies Pitcairn made the decision. He's silent on the question of who made the order, but he implies it was Major Pitcairn who was in charge at the head of the column. He says Major Pitcairn's galloping up to the head of the advance companies. All right, he's at the head. He's there when they reach that moment of left or right. The light infantry observing the militia dispersing behind the fence. The light infantry ran after them. The major instantly called on the soldiers not to fire, but to surround and disarm them. That puts Pitcairn at the head of the column, on the green, interacting with the militia. If he was at the head of the column and on the green, interacting with the militia, he made the decision. That is what this report implies. Many authors have taken that view. In Lexington and Concord, Tudelat writes that Pitcairn was at the head of the column, probably reading Gage's report, and he gave the order to advance toward the militia. Christopher Hibbert in Breakcoat's Rebels writes that Major Pitcairn, who was in command of the leading British detachment, Colonel Parker, both ordered their men not to fire, but anyway, he's focusing on Pitcairn at the decision point. William Howland, in the day the American Revolution began, writes that Pitcairn was at the head of the column, states that it was Pitcairn that was at the head of the column on page 30, though he discusses other officers with Pitcairn. There are all these other officers are officers who are from these mounted patrols that have returned to the main body. And he doesn't even mention Sutherland or Adair. They don't exist in the book. John Gavin, very interesting book written by former Supreme Command, Allied Commander in Europe. He has a general's view and talks a lot about command structures and things like that and how errors occur. He says Pitcairn led his column to the right and let his column go to the right, and that he lost contact with them while he galloped to the left of the meeting house. So his idea is that Pitcairn's at the head and the column takes off by itself while Pitcairn is going this way, and then he has an extensive discussion of the errors in managing the situation on passing references to Sutherland and Adair. So far it looks like Pitcairn's the bad guy, right? Rick Atkinson in The British Are Coming ignores the question who ordered and just describes what happened. The heavy steps broke the quiet as three companies veered to the right. The companies veered to the right all of their own. There was no officer involved. David Hackett Fisher. Okay, this book, if you're going to read one book, this is it. Got to read this book. It's a monumental work. It has 75 pages of footnotes and explanations. Virtually every paragraph in the entire book is footnoted with wonderful sources. He lists hundreds of sources. He writes about Adair. He thinks Adair was the one who turned the column to the right. The young Marine did not hesitate. He made a snap decision of momentous consequence. Lieutenant Adair instantly turned to the right and led the three foreign companies directly toward the militia. This is the only paragraph with substance in the entire book that has no footnote. Drove me crazy. He also refers to Adair as a hard-charging young Marine, quick to act, but sometimes slow to understand. And it has a footnote for that. It doesn't discuss the topic when you check the footnote. If the footnote is misnumbered or something. I have an electronic copy of the book. I have searched for Adair. I tried to find if the footnote number is wrong. maybe there's another footnote that will discuss it. It is not in the book. David Hackett Fisher does not explain why he calls Adair, why he says Adair made the decision. He does understand how important it was, which I really like, and so he got me off of this, by the way, this little journey. But he also calls him a young Marine. He was 44 or whatever it was. He wasn't young. And so I don't know what his unknown source was that he used for this, but it's not in the book, which is really too bad. 75 pages of footnotes. The single most important paragraph in the book, no footnote. Online sources generally go with Fisher's interpretation. Wikipedia says Adair was the officer that turned the column right instead of left. It references David Hackett Fisher as the source. Of course, now we always go to ChatGPT for everything. It says Adair was the officer that turned the column right instead of left, but references David Hackett Fisher as the source. And the American Battlefield Trust says Adair led the column to the right, but cites no source. Trying to get everybody into the game here. So let's go back and see if we can read some of the reports from the participants and see if we can piece this out. Is Adair the guy who started the American Revolution, or was it Pitcairn? Nobody really blames Southern. Here's the report. This is on the 26th. That's what, 7 days after the battle. Near 3 in the morning, we were advanced to within about 2 miles of Lexington. Intelligence was received. About 500 men in arms were assembled to join the opposing King's troops and retarded them in their march. On this intelligence, I mounted my horse and galloped up to the 6th. He wasn't up with the 6 companies at that moment. Galloped up to the 6 light companies. When I arrived at the head of the advance company, 2 officers with cannon informed me that a man of the rebels advanced from those that were assembled and attempted to shoot them. Those 2, by the way, are Sutherland and Adair. We know that from their report, from Sutherland's report. But the piece flashed in the pan. On this, I gave directions to the troops to move forward, but no account to fire or even attempt it without orders. When I arrived at the end of the village, not at the green, at the end of the village, I observed along the drawn up upon a green near 200 of the rebels. When I came to within about 100 yards of them, they began to file off towards the stone walls on our right flank. Now, I think there's enough information in this for us to excuse Pitcairn from being the person who gave the order to turn. And I'd like you to focus on the bold. When I came about 100 yards from them, they began to file off. Now, we know that the fighting broke out when the militia started to file off. Parker changed his mind about standing their ground. He wanted to save the lives of his men, which is what a good leader does in a hopeless situation. And he tells the men to disperse. And they start to disperse. And at that moment, the shot rings out from who knows where, or who fired it, and the fighting starts. It was as they were beginning to file off. Pitcairn, by his own report, is 100 yards away. Now, was he maybe really 30 yards away? Maybe he just overestimated the distance. No, he didn't overestimate the distance. He was a British Marine officer. 100 yards is a magic distance. That is when concentrated volley fire is ordered in this time period. At 100 yards, the muskets start to be effective. You open fire on your enemy at 100 yards. I bet he could tell the difference between 96 yards and 100 yards, or 102 yards and 100 yards. He was also on a horse, he had some perspective. If he says he was 100 yards away, he was 100 yards away. He was not there on the green. He was not the officer who led the troops onto the green. Where was he if he was 100 yards away? I have indicated the 100-yard mark here on the map. He could have been on the right wing because the buildings would have obscured his view. So he was on the left wing. Probably what happened was he was maybe halfway down the column. He sees the first 3 columns veering off to the right. He knows that's wrong. He orders the next 3 companies to veer to the left. And that is where he is at the moment he sees the fighting and the carnage break out. He's 100 yards away. So let's read Sutherland's report. Sutherland wrote a report as well. I went on with the front party, which consisted of a sergeant and 6 or 8 men. I shall observe that the road before you go into Lexington is level for about 1,000 yards. Here we saw shots fired to the right and left of us, but as we heard no whizzing, great word, I love that, no whizzing of balls, I concluded they were to alarm that body that was there of our approach. On coming with a gunshot of the village of Lexington, a fellow from the corner of the road on the right had cocked his piece at me, burnt priming, and I immediately called to Mr. Adair and the party to observe the circumstance, which they did, and I acquainted Major Pitcairn of it immediately. Now there are 2 versions of this letter. One was written on the 26th and one was written on the 27th. I'm giving you the version of the 27th, and there is one key difference in them, only one, and that is the preposition I in the last sentence is not in the first version. That sentence reads, the party to observe the circumstances, which they did, and acquainted Major Pitcairn of it immediately. That is an ambiguous sentence. You do not know who is acquainting Major Pitcairn in the first version of the letter. That letter went to General Clinton. It's called the Clinton letter. The Kimball letter, which went to General Gage's secretary, whose name was Kimball, as you recall. He adds the I specifically. So he wants us to know that he, Sutherland, acquainted Major Pitcairn. So what does that mean? First of all, they're within a gunshot of the village of Lexington. Now, gunshot turns out to be a term of art and to be a measurement that is actually quite specific. What am I doing? I'm in trouble. I'm going to try to speed up here. We're getting to the conclusion. A gunshot was about 300 yards. It was the maximum range of a musket. It's not just a metaphor. It was a measurement. So again, a British Army officer would know what distance a gunshot was. And so they're 300 yards from the village. They're quite far from the green. That is where the flash in the pan occurs. A fellow from the corner of the road, I'm not sure what the corner means here. Is it referring to where the road diverges in 2 directions? What other corners would there be? So, and he's still 300 yards away. And the I is really important here. I acquainted Major Pitcairn of it immediately. He left Adair alone at the head of the column. Pitcairn was back, we know that from the prior report. Sutherland rides to Pitcairn to tell him that maybe someone tried to take a shot at him. And he leaves Jesse Adair by himself, leading the column as they reach the grave. Conclusion, it was Jesse Adair that started the American Revolution. There's no direct testimony, but we can piece it together. Pitcairn was too far away to overrule him. Sutherland wasn't there to calm him. Adair was the very last person in this long chain. He was the one who could make a decision that would lead to war or not at that moment. He made the fateful, irreversible, cataclysmic decision to turn right at the fort and form up the line infantry in front of Parker's men. After that, events were an automatic. 2 lines of angry, tired armed men facing each other 50 yards apart. Scores to settle on both sides. An unstable environment with alarm shots popping off all over the place, and light infantry training to use initiative and take individual action. They fired and charged with their bayonets without orders, because that's what they were trained to do, was to use their initiative. It was Jesse Adair that set that situation up where violent conflict was inevitable once the column turned right. Was he justified? That's something that's interesting to debate. If you remember, the militia was off to the left, not blocking the road. Fisher says he does justify. He says because he was leaving a hostile force on the column's flank would be risky. But other commentators really don't agree with that. Gavin, for example. The militia posed no immediate threat to the column. There were 700 regulars on the road behind it. There were 77 militia really a problem. confronting the militia led the column away from its prime objective and was contrary to Adair's direct orders, which was move as fast as you can and get to the bridges in Concord. He could have pushed on and sent word back to Pitcairn and let him deal with it. And by the way, when Pitcairn got there, he veered left toward Concord, and he led 3 companies to the left. By the way, I think it's very interesting that Pitcairn, Sutherland, and other officers wrote reports on the event, but not Adair. I've been unable, and no author has ever referenced the report by Adair. I've been unable to find anything that he wrote. Why didn't he write a report? Because he started the conflagration. So the aftermath, you all know. The word spread like lightning to the colonial militia companies marching for Concord that the regulars had fired on and killed militiamen. This was a change. Think of Salem, 1 bayonet cut, no gunfire. The powder alarm, no gunfire. There were other times, no gunfire. But now it's different. Now British troops had killed militiamen, and if you're a militiaman, you feel very different now. The war is on. At the North Bridge, the colonial militia didn't hesitate to fire, and British troops began to fall. The flame ignited on Lexington Green and fanned at the North Bridge, spread all the way back to Boston along the Battle Road, crowned into an inferno, and spread across the 13 colonies. And it was Jesse Adair that started it all, the last person in the chain who could have changed the future. I think it's important that we pause for a moment and consider the most important aspect of this, and that is that 8 Americans died on Lexington Green. 7 of them were in the company, one was probably a bystander. But they died for a cause. They had an idea. Their idea was big. Their idea was they could begin the world anew. On the day they died, the number of people living in the world under democratic governments was 0. Today, 2.5 billion people live on our planet under democratic governments where the leaders are elected. They wanted to change the world. I think they pulled it off. Thank you. I'm sorry I went over. Let me move us to the. So let me talk about Tom Gilmore for a moment. I'm going to introduce him. He has a few words to say from the American Battlefield Trust. I can't read this in the dark, so I'm going to just pretend I remember it. He's been with the American Battlefield Trust for 20 years. He's done 600 deals to preserve historic sites, save them from real estate developers and highway construction and data centers and all kinds of. Disneyland wanted to put a Disney World on a Civil War battlefield, where the largest cavalry battle, Grand Station, where the largest cavalry battle in North America occurred. The trust saves the sites and preserves them so that we can know what happened there and experience it, see the sight lines that the participants saw, and think about the meaning of what they did. 700 deals that he saved, $500 million worth of preservation. The guy is a hero. So let me introduce him. And he has a few remarks. Please. And then there'll be a 15-minute session after if anybody wants to stay longer.
Okay, well, thank you, David, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for that fascinating lecture. It was so interesting about Adair, and it's also good to hear we don't have to change our website, it sounds like. I mean, we're all set. We were right. Anyway, well, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about the trust and what we're doing in the Revolutionary War preservation, which is still relatively new for us. We, for those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit organization, 501c3, based in DC. We're the largest battlefield land preservation group currently nationwide, focusing on Civil War, Revolutionary War, and War of 1812 preservation, land preservation, as well as history education. In fact, I'm sure a lot of you who have been to our website, have been to our YouTube channel, and all the social media that we do, have seen a lot of the content that we produce. When we were formed back in '87, it was strictly Civil War preservation. That was in reaction to a huge battlefield loss in Northern Virginia, the Battle of Chantilly. A group of historians got together, formed the trust in '87 to start saving Civil War sites. But years later, in 2014, we were asked by the National Park Service to take on Revolutionary War and War of 1812 because the Park Service had done a study, I'll talk about this in a second, of the most significant sites to save in those two conflicts. They came to us and said, well, you are so successful in Civil War preservation, can you take on preserving land in these two conflicts? So we decided to try it out in 2014, and we decided to take it on officially. And then in 2018, we changed our name to the American Battlefield Trust from the Civil War Preservation Trust to reflect the fact that we were more broader in scope. So today, we saved about 60,000 acres, 163 sites in 25 states. And as far as the Revolutionary War is concerned, as I mentioned, we work from a National Park Service studies done in 2007. You can see that you can get this online. As the Park Service looked at the significant Revolutionary War and War of 1812 sites and narrowed it down to what they considered, what historians considered the most significant sites to preserve. Same thing was done in the Civil War back in the 90s as a congressional commissioner was done. That was appointed to look at the 10,000 or so Civil War engagements and narrowed it down to 384 battlefields. Well, the same thing was done by the Park Service in 2007, and they came up with 165 Revolutionary War sites in 25 states. So that's what we say organizationally, that the Trust is trying to preserve these 165 sites. So how do we preserve land? And we see opportunities almost every day coming at us from the Civil War, Revolutionary War, and War of 1812 sites all around the country. We've got the ability at every one of these sites to do mapping so that when people approach us, where of course we want to go after certain sites proactively, but in many cases people just come to us and say, is my property located on a battlefield? We have the ability to map the property, see where it lies on the battlefield. What's shown on this map is this area in pink, which is the core area of the battlefield, and that's where the fighting occurred. And then this area surrounding that in yellow, which is the study area, where there are avenues of approach and retreat and staging and so forth. So what we say is that we are trying to preserve land at the core and study area at these battlefields. And this core and study area was determined by the National Park Service. When they did that study back in 2007, they had historians and others go out and determine the core and study areas. That's what we say we are trying to preserve at these battlefields. So once we decide that a property is in the core area that we want to preserve, we negotiate a preservation transaction with the owner. We only work with willing sellers. Of course, we don't have the power of eminent domain, so we've got to work out an agreement with the landowner. And we do a variety of things. We just buy land outright in fee simple acquisitions. We buy land, we do sale leaseback transactions in which someone wants to stay on the property and continue to farm it long term, or continue to live on the property the rest of their lives. So we do a lot of acquisitions subject to a life estate where people would just stay on the property until they pass away, and then we get all the real estate interest at that point. And we preserve land by conservation easement, where someone just continues to own the land, but they are willing to grant a conservation easement to protect it in perpetuity and save it from all the development, the data centers, the solar farms, the apartment buildings, or whatever kind of development is out there. And so then we figure out how to fund it. once we structure a transaction, and fortunately, we've got a federal grant program through the Park Service called the American Battlefield Protection Program. And that program will fund up to 50% of the value of the preservation transaction. We have, in certain states that are listed here, Virginia, Tennessee, Mississippi, Kentucky, working on something in Georgia right now, to create these battlefield matching grant programs that will fund the other 50%. So we have federal grant funding 50%, have the state matching programs that will fund the other 50%. Of course, more often than not, there is private money involved. We try to get money from foundations, from corporations, and of course the trust membership. And I do mention landowner donation benefits. One of the things about preservation generally is that when land is donated to a qualified organization like ours, there are tax benefits, charitable deduction benefits, and in some cases there are state income tax credits that are created. So there are tax benefits to preservation too that we certainly would take advantage of. And then after we acquire property, we most of the time we acquire property, it's in a modern state. There are modern improvements, houses, and in this case, what's shown in the photos of Gettysburg. We acquired 4.5 acres. There was a Quality Inn. This was the site of Robert E. Lee's headquarters at the first day of the battle. The historic Mary Thompson House was on the property, but there was a Quality Inn and a modern restaurant building. It was a very expensive acquisition, but as soon as we acquired it, we took down the Quality Inn buildings and the restaurant building and restored it to the way on the bottom photo, the way it looked exactly in the Matthew Brady photograph that was taken shortly after the battle, down to the smallest detail, so that when you go there now, you can see how it looked at the time of the battle. So that's actually our ultimate goal. First, we want to preserve the land, but then ultimately, we want to restore it to the way it looked at the time of the battle and interpret it with walking trails and signage and really interesting things that we're doing now, like augmented reality and things like that. Then we'll transfer it to a third party. So we partner with the National Park Service all the time. We are acquiring land, and shown here in the photo of Guilford Courthouse. We acquired small tracts around Guilford Courthouse that we transferred to Park Service, but also a lot of state parks. Like New York, for instance, a lot of the Revolutionary War battlefields in New York are state parks. So we have partnered with the state of New York to preserve land and ultimately gets into the state park. So I'll just go through a few of our preservation highlights. So locally here, we just talked about it. David just talked about it. Lexington, Concord, and Parker's Revenge. We actually saved a tract that's owned by the town of Lincoln. It was a small tract. It's up in the corner in kind of light blue there. It's kind of hard to see. It's in the upper left-hand corner there. But we acquired that tract from the town of Lincoln, and then we transferred it to the Minuteman Park. So it's now owned by the National Park Service. That was the very first Revolutionary War acquisition. We did that at the end of 2015. And I'll go in chronological order of battle here, so you have a sense of chronology. But then at Great Bridge, also in the 1775 battle, this is in Virginia, Chesapeake, Virginia. We acquired a key tract there, right near the museum there. We've never been there, and we transferred that to the city of Chesapeake. And in Princeton, New Jersey, I think probably most of you have heard about this. Of course, this was the battle in January 1777, and this was a very big public preservation fight between local preservationists versus the Institute for Advanced Study, which had planned to develop about 15 acres into faculty housing. But we, fortunately, by then, we had gotten involved in we decided to do the Revolutionary War battlefield preservation, got involved in negotiations, worked out a deal to acquire this property shown there in dark green, adjacent to the state park there in Princeton. So we've acquired it. Now we're going on a big restoration effort, which we're calling Washington's Legacy there at Princeton. So we want to restore the property that we bought and also partner with the state in restoring its property there at the state park. At Brandywine, we've been doing a lot of preservation. Fortunately, Brandywine is generally an area that there's a lot of interest historically in preserving. There's a land trust there, been there for many years, which we're partnering with what's shown here is a site that we're hopefully about to close here relatively soon. It's at Shad's Ford. It's Washington's defenses there. What's shown here is a photo of what is the original house on the property there at time of battle where the Wyeth family lived. Actually, you can see Wyeth lived there, and I think Henry was alive when they were there. Yeah, we do a lot. There's a lot more to do. Certainly at Brandywine, a lot of the property there is preserved. At Saratoga, which of course is mostly preserved by the National Park, we did do a couple of acquisitions, but we've since transferred to the National Park there. At Kettle Creek, Georgia, that area in blue is land that we preserved at Kettle Creek. That's a county park. So we preserve that land. We after we acquire it, we will grant conservation easement on it to a third party, and then we'll transfer it, in this case, to the county for incorporation into a county park. In Waxhaws, which is one of the many sites in South Carolina that we're preserving, as you all know, I'm sure that so much of the Revolution, so many battles occurred in South Carolina. Waxhaws is one of them. An area there in yellow is a property that we acquired. It's surrounding the little memorial area there in brown that's been there for generations. But as you can see, it's a battlefield that's not finished. So it's evident from this map here that we preserved about half of the battlefield. We saw about half to go there on the other side of the road. So fortunately, that land is still pristine, and it's definitely one of our top targets. At Guilford Courthouse, which of course is a national park site, we've been just filling in some of the smaller pieces there. There's one down there at the bottom, it's shown in yellow, but they're just small little tracks with a generally a kind of a ranch house on or whatever, and we've just been picking them up as they become available and getting them into the national park. And in Utah Springs, another South Carolina battle, there was some land there preserved before we got involved, shown there in brown, but there's a lot more left to preserve. So the tract shown in yellow there is one that we've acquired now, but there's some other properties that we've acquired that are shown in blue. And but there's a lot more to preserve in that battlefield too. And then lastly, at Yorktown, we acquired some land that is shown there in yellow, and the risk, this was a very expensive transaction, but at the time, there was a developer who owned this, and the illustration on the right is a subdivision plan. There were going to be over 100 single-family houses developed on that land, and it had already been zoned for that. Fortunately, we got in there and negotiated something with the developer, and we were able to acquire it before it got started. And then we'll transfer that property eventually to Colonial National Historic Park, National Park Service. And then in terms of initiatives generally, you may have heard about this. This is the Liberty Trail Initiative, which is South Carolina based. Although we want to expand it to other states, and we're in the process of doing that. But this was a partnership between us, the state of South Carolina, and the South Carolina Battlegrounds Trust and Statewide Preservation Group. But it's a combination of land preservation and interpretation, and really a tourist initiative too for the state. And that's the one thing about our preservation efforts. I always try to emphasize to localities and states that when you preserve these sites and you restore them, you're creating a destination park that benefits not only the residents of the locality and the state, but also brings in people from outside to visit them, and obviously they spend a lot of money at that site in the local, helps the local economy. So that is that's my presentation at this point. Ken and David, I think there were any questions for
I do actually have one more slide, and that is resources. And if anybody wants a copy of these slides, write your email address on the back of this piece of paper, and I'll send them to you. The resources I did want to comment on, let's just get PowerPoint back up. Where is it? Here it is. So anybody here who does not subscribe to Katie Turner Getty's YouTube channel is making a huge mistake. She's local here in Lexington. She would have been a better speaker for you today than me. But she has one video after another details of local Revolutionary War history, and it's a great site. Books I like are The Road to Concord, How a Force-Filling Cannon Ignited the Revolutionary War. It takes a very interesting twist, which is, well, where did the cannon come from and cause the whole thing? And also the author, J.O. Bell, has a great website, Boston1775.net. It's an old-fashioned blog. He posts constantly, does wonderful research, and just a fabulous site. You got to read Paul Revere's Ride if you want to talk about the Revolutionary War in Massachusetts in 1775. If you haven't read this book, you are not qualified to say anything at a meeting. So it is the definitive work on it. I also like The British Are Coming by Rick Atkinson. It doesn't deal as much with Lexington and Concord, but it's one of those, it deals with the first half of the war, starts with Lexington, deals with the first half of the war. Actually starts with King George's birthday celebration, which is several years before it breaks out. The war breaks out, and you realize a lot about what King George was like. And then it goes through the first half of the Revolution. Every page you will learn things you just didn't know. Pack. I like The Minuteman by John Gavin. He was Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. And he takes a general's approach. He analyzes it from a command structure perspective and military tactics. It's really different. It's out of print now, but you can find used copies of it online. And I wish, I don't know this for a fact, but I assume he's passed away because the book was quite a while ago. I wish somebody would update it with his perspective. Revolutionary Summer by Joseph Ellis is really terrific. It really starts after Bunker Hill and goes forward, and it talks about, in a very profound way, the summer which defined the nature of how the revolution happened, why it happened, how it happened, what the British were doing. Very, very good book. I like the Begin the World Anew. I actually noticed I stole the line from Begin the World Anew from my slide with the Patriot names on it by Bernard Bailey. He really talks about the unfettered imaginations of the Patriot leaders and how they imagined this completely different world. It's hard for us to understand how radical their thinking was and how different. He also summarizes the book in a lecture. Then the Lexington Minuteman Society has really terrific detail, all kinds of interesting stuff, including the fact that they say at the beginning there weren't Minutemen in Lexington Green, which I appreciate them doing. And then, of course, the American Battlefield Trust side. So these are really good resources, great books, knowledgeable authors, good videos, local people in many cases who really understand this. If you want a copy of the slides, here's a piece of paper. So, if you get it down out first, if anybody is interested. Any questions? Yes, sir.
In Pitcairn's account, he speaks of giving orders and then hearing shots. And by implication, those are the first shots on the green. By that point, while you're reading, the confrontation has already begun.
Yeah.
Basically, you're saying those shots were inevitable once armed men were facing off against each other. Have I got that right?
You do. So the question is, in Pitcairn's account, he says he gave orders and then shots were fired. He gave orders on the fire and then shots were fired. And he puts himself at the action when it's happening. I think that's an after the fact rationalization. He doesn't want to say, I wasn't there, I lost control of my men. And he wants to blame the colonials, of course. The whole purpose of the reports at that moment is to blame the militia for firing first. But I think he is just doing a rationalization at that moment. He doesn't want to say, I wasn't there, I was out of control, I wasn't, Adair was off doing stuff. without me, I think the sort of honest part of his report is where he says it was 100 yards away when they begin to file off. That puts him quite far away when the shooting starts. It's an interpretation, I admit. Yes, sir.
I have actually 3 questions. I'll do them really quick.
Okay.
First of all, Don Troiani's still alive. Have you thought about contacting him directly and asking him about his research that went into that painting?
What a great idea that is. I bet you know him. And I think that is a wonderful thing to follow up on. I wish I had done that. He's very friendly to the American Battlefield Trust. And so I think I'm going to take that on as an action item.
Secondly, was Margaret Kimball Gage actually an American, or was she a British woman who was just extraordinarily
Yeah.
sympathetic?
No, she was American. She grew up in New York City. Her family was from New York. I don't know, she was not the first generation of American in her family. So they actually met in New York. Gage was there before he was sent to Boston. So she was a native-born American.
And
By the way, she's put on the ship by Gage as soon as possible after the event, and she never returns. And he joins her. He resigns his position because he had a heart for her, doesn't want to be away from her. They live out their lives in England. She never comes back to the United States and everything.
Lastly, you had said that there were about 70 or 80 militiamen on Lexington Green. Pitcairn's report, he says 200. He
Yeah.
estimated 200. That's a pretty big gap.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he could correctly estimate it. They had received a report that there were 500 men. Actually, Paul Revere told Mitchell, who had arrested him, that there were 500 men waiting for them on Lexington Green. And that report got made, and Pitcairn at that moment orders the men to halt and to load their weapons. He does order them not to fire, but they're still quite far from the green when that happens. But he's been told there are 500. And Adair and Sutherland would have had that report as well. So when they get to the green, the British do exaggerate the numbers. For what it's worth, the colonials exaggerate the numbers too. There were, 2 companies, less than 200 British soldiers on the green at that moment. The 3rd company never formed up. The last 3 companies didn't turn left instead of right. So it's normal in the military actions to exaggerate the other side's strength. And so Pitcairn, I think, is exaggerating it. The main goal of the report is to blame the colonials for firing first. That's what they want. Was that 3 questions?
So it's all 3.
Yes, ma'am.
So it's 5 a.m. on the green. The 2 sides are lined up confronting each other. Major Pitcairn gallops onto the green, issues those orders to the militia who begin to move away. That shot rings out, that first shot. Had there been no first shot, what do you think might have happened or not happened? Might have it resolved itself without fighting?
So one detail that I would disagree with you on is I don't think Pitcairn was on the green at all. He was 100 yards away. He had gone to the left. He was barely down that road any distance, maybe 10 yards, maybe less. So I don't think he was there. But Adair is there. And he, in my view, is the likely officer who gave the disarm command to the colonials. Sutherland's not there either. He has ridden back to give the word to Pitcairn. He's probably around Pitcairn at that moment. So what would happen? There were shots going off everywhere. There were alarm shots being fired. There were drunk people in the tavern with firearms. There were nervous British soldiers who were angry and whose weapons were loaded. And they had momentum. Their momentum was charging toward, they were double quick time. They went onto the green in double quick time, which is like 140 paces a minute or something like that. And so they're charging forward. Their bayonets are fixed. Their weapons are loaded. They're light infantry. What light infantry does is screen and act independently. I think the fuse was burning and there was going to be an explosion. Without that shot, it would have happened anyway.
So you previous situations. I think, for example, at Salem, we had the Americans, if I can call them that at that time, taunt the British soldiers under Leslie, saying you can't fight without further orders. Did the British soldiers on the green at 5 a.m., did they go rogue?
I would have trouble saying it. First of all, the Salem alarm, it wasn't light infantry. It was regular infantry. And they did act in mass and according to orders more. But I think blaming the soldiers is wrong here. They were angry, they were tired, they were wet, they were cold. They were nervous at one point. There's one report that they're marching along toward Lexington and a column halts and they can hear church bells ringing in every direction. They know that the alarm is up. They know that the militia is forming everywhere. They're deep in enemy territory in the dark, surrounded by enemies. You put those, and they're light infantry, they're supposed to act independently. You put them in that situation, charging, moving, bayonets, moving toward the enemy. I don't think they went rogue. I think the officers were, I think Adair got what he wanted.
So one more question.
Please.
To further that situation, so the soldiers are aware that militiamen are marching toward the areas Lexington conquered.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a reason for the soldiers not to shoot without orders on that morning? Because you've got a bigger, increasingly larger enemy to deal with as this day progresses.
Well, you had the attitude that we're the British Army and we're invincible and these guys are rabble. And what we need to do is slap them upside of the head a couple of times and they'll turn and run. So I think that would have been it. Now later they might have acted very differently, once they realized that they had a formidable foe. But remember that letter from Lord Dartmouth. I mean, I described it as clueless because he didn't understand how widespread the rebellion was and how many, 25,000 militias around Boston after Lexington conquered. 25,000! And Gage has 5,000 available to him. I think that the attitude, though, at that moment was we're invincible, we're the British Army. These guys are rabble. Yes, somebody have their hand up? Yes, right here.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask about that first shot you covered that. The other kind of questionable thing that I've heard different things about, I didn't know if you did more research into, is the veteran status of Captain Parker. I know the conventional wisdom, I think even family sources and a lot of circulator recording sources say that he was a veteran of the French and Indian War. I have also seen at least one source that swears up and down that their records indicate he was in town when he otherwise might have been out off the war. So I didn't know if you had looked into that any further.
I haven't. I think that sounds really interesting. I know that there are there are different degrees of credibility. One is that fairly credible, but not universal, that he was a veteran of the French and Indian War. The next one is that he was trained with Rogers Rangers. Whether or not that occurred or not is more speculative. He does act at Parker's Revenge as if he knows what he's doing. He runs a really good battle. He picks good ground where they're firing down. He does not ignore his flanks. They deal a great deal of damage to the British column, and most importantly, they slow it up. They stop it for a while in order to send I think it's Brigadiers to send out to flank his position. While they're stopped, the mass from the Bloody Angle and Merriman's Corner and North Bridge, all of those men, because the British had almost cleared it, had almost cleared the colonials until they hit Parker. And then they stop and they're suddenly surrounded again. So he fights a really good battle as if he knows what he's doing. So I think he must have had serious combat experience. You don't do that on your first time at bat. You don't do that well.
Anything else?
Over here?
Yes, please.
It's been a while since I read Fisher, but I seem to recall in there that he threw out this, actually for him, somewhat lame suggestion that there may have been some kind of French agents in the area at the time the shots went off. As I recall, he seemed to be suggesting they may have been over on a bike path in that area. He kind of lets it drop uncharacteristically, and it's almost like his weakest legal argument in the brief. He
Yeah.
just sticks it at the bottom. It seems to me, you know, as with most events in history, you don't need a conspiracy to explain. And, I mean, what's your take on that notion?
Yeah, he tries really hard to figure out who fired the shot, and in the end he says, I don't know. And I think that's the state of the art. On the state of our knowledge is we don't know. And my own view is it doesn't matter. Because I think you have two companies of the light infantry, double quick time, in column, fanning out into line and advancing. Not sure they maintain double quick time on that advance, but within 30 yards of the enemy, bayonets fixed, alarm shots. They think people have fired them already. The flash in the pan incident. They've been hearing alarm shots as they've been marching. It's got to happen. And who was it most likely? It was most likely a drunk militiaman from the tavern. There's some witnesses that place an individual at the tavern firing 2 shots. But, you know, a drunk militiaman at the tavern probably fired a shot. Made no difference. There was going to be death on the green because the situation at that point, it was an out of control locomotive going down the tracks. It was going to hit something.
Over here?
Yes.
When you say that drunk militiamen at the tavern, back then everyone drank alcohol because water would get polluted and you get
Yeah.
sick. I think they held their liquor better than today. That's my thought.
You may very be right. He might have been a stone cold sober militiaman in the tavern. So we should all go out and drink some and see how we feel.
With guns.
With guns.
Oh, no.
Okay, any other questions? This has been great. I've really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you so much.